Simply speaking, when did history begin and how the Earth was peopled in the first place? School teachers are typically laconic speaking of human prehistory and the Stone Age. They tend to think of it as a different subject rather than human history, which they usually begin with the introduction of writing systems. As a result, after school many of us imagine history this way. At first there were dinosaurs who were colossal themselves and lasted long. Then primitive humans appeared, funny with their special diet based on human meat, cut and cooked using stone-made knives. Soon after they replaced stone forks with bronze-made and began building pyramids. Then iron conquered the market, and that was already the antique epoch, when scripts of some of the main Hollywood blockbusters were first written. When Greeks became obsolete, Middle Ages ensued with their mind-blowing knights in those marvelous steel helmets. After they ceased forging armors, there was a gap of which most of us do not remember much, but soon they invented a steam engine, beginning a steampunk era. This was already almost our time, and soon we dropped nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, beginning nuclear epoch, landed on the moon starting a space era, made computers, internet, Wi-Fi, and finally introduced AI, which, as many of us think, marks the end of the human history, though we are not sure yet. I do not mean to criticize, but such a view, no matter how usual, seems oversimplified. To get a more serious understanding, we have to bear in mind a couple circumstances. The first is that we do not know which event is the beginning of history. Should we count that from the first written grocery store bill or from the first birthday of the first modern human? The second is that scientists still cannot give us the exact figures on when modern humans appeared, and that is for the two obvious reasons. The first is that modern humans evolved in Africa, which is not the best continent to store your ancient skeletons in the ground, as most organic remnants there disintegrate, leaving no trace at all. The second is that Africa is not the most comfortable continent to conduct scientific research. As to each one heat and guerrilla-resistant scientist who is going to dig ancient skulls there, you need to pay bonuses and provide him with an expensive insurance, making your total expenses exorbitant. Certainly, should modern human be born somewhere around what is now Amsterdam, we should already know his exact birthday, what day of the week it was, and a PhD in anthropology would be 1,000,000 times more usual than today. This just did not happen. Speaking of the age of humanity, religious Jews give us the most exact date. According to their lore, the whole universe came to exist exactly 5,784 years ago, that is in our European year 2023, with Earth being issued on Sunday and populated with animals and the first human on Friday that same week. Interestingly, according to their beliefs, mitochondrial Eva appeared later than Y-chromosomal Adam. The most radical anthropologists estimate the age of the modern humans around 300,000 years, but this estimate is not yet supported by sufficient evidence. Somewhat less radical estimation, likely to be confirmed with more evidence including the genetic data soon, measures age of modern humans as 100,000 years younger. As far as we understand today, Homo sapiens appears as a population of a few thousand people in Africa some 200,000 years ago. They lived among other human species, growing in numbers and expanding their area of habitat. As they have reached northern Africa, some of them began taking trips to Asia and Europe. Outside Africa, these pioneers of far-reaching tourism met Neanderthals and hybridized with them, as we see in places like Cave Schula, in what is now Israel, where skulls of hybrid humans are found. Those early migrants were fully assimilated by Neanderthals and leave no living direct descendants among now living humans. Some 75,000 years ago, Mount Toba erupted, becoming the most colossal catastrophe within the time-space of human existence. Some scientists hypothesize that from 2 to 10,000 modern humans survived climactic crisis that followed the eruption out of approximately 1 million that lived at the moment it happened. Consequently, they began to recover and migrate from Africa in larger numbers. And from then, Neanderthals were assimilated by sapienses. From Africa, humans migrated to the east. On their way they met and also hybridized, which they seemingly liked to do, this time with Denisovans, reaching Australia some 60,000 years ago. Paradoxically, though Europe seems much closer to Africa, modern humans reached it only approximately 45,000 years ago. Gradually they inhabited All Eurasia, some 15,000 years ago, they crossed then a land bridge Beringia from Eurasia to Northern America, and from north to south populated both Americas, with most islands in the Atlantic and the Pacific already inhabited to this time. Some 1,000 years ago, Iceland and Greenland were discovered and populated, with the last known large piece of land inhabited de novo, New Zealand, only some 800 years ago. Most of this time, humans were hunter-gatherers using tools made of wood, bone, horn and stone, with not much more civilization than apes have in our time. Supposed ecological crisis pushed them to seek for new habitats, adapting to new conditions. Around 10,000 years ago, the latest ice age ends, forcing humans to change their habits again and triggering Neolithic revolution, transfer from appropriating economy to producing economy, based on agriculture and animal husbandry. This triggered population growth and led to the urbanization. The most ancient findings in the most ancient settlement known, Jericho, are dated approximately 10,000 years ago. Most of the cultures of this time are known by their characteristic artifacts. They probably did not have writing system yet, thus we do not know much about their languages, ethnonyms and toponyms. Some 9,100 years ago, Çatalhöyük, a vast settlement probably inhabited by yet hunter-gatherers, arose. Archaeologists find no signs of any social stratification in this ancient society that has existed about 2,000 years. Around 8,200 years ago, one of the latest major geographic changes occurred. A great tsunami at once gulped vast pastures of Doggerland, making Great Britain an island. Approximately 7,400 years ago, Eridu was founded. In its time, it was thought of as the first and the greatest city in the world, and it may be treated as the beginning of Sumerian civilization that left a great lore and influenced the whole human history. Eridu's great temple of the god Enki became a prototype for multiple temples in Mesopotamia, and further, the two famous temples of Jerusalem were probably modeled using this prototype. Within the next couple thousand years, plenty of interesting things happened. An advance that made humans the only ones is the discovery of beer making, together with bread bakery. Probably the most important invention made by humanity, has probably occurred already more than 7,000 years ago. Asian buffalo was tamed. Wheel invented. Earliest known forms of writing appeared. Approximately 6,500 years ago, a plow begins to be employed in Europe. And finally, some 5,300 years ago or somewhat earlier, the Bronze Age begins. Civilization gradually accelerated its development, becoming more and more pronounced and complex. Some 5,400 years ago, cuneiform appears in Mesopotamia. Around 3 centuries later, hieroglyphs appear in Egypt. 5,000 years ago, the longest building project in history begins, the erection of Stonehenge, to finalize it 1,000 years later. As soon as they've learned writing, they began building skyscrapers. In the 3rd millennium BC, some 4,600 years ago, legendary Gilgamesh ruled in Sumerian Uruk. Some 4,500 years ago, pharaohs Djoser and Cheops built their pyramids. Simultaneously, Indus Valley civilization and its great megalopolis Harappa evolved in India. Little more than 4,000 years ago, the great ziggurat of Ur at Temeniguru was erected. In the New World, the earliest findings attributed to Mayan civilization are dated to be some 4,000 years old. Between 3,000 and 4,000 years ago, Egyptians tried to introduce monotheism as a state religion for the first time and failed when Akhenaton attempted to establish the sun god Aten as the one and only god of Egypt. But in the end, fans of other respectable Egyptian gods took over. At this time, Babylon rules Mesopotamia and Hammurabi places his law code on steles in temples. In the New World, the advanced Olmec civilization prospers, leaving huge stone statues as milestones of the Pre-Columbian American history. Another important civilization appears in the now Greek island of Crete, and that is Minoan civilization, known for its marvelous palaces. By the way, somewhere around 3,300 years ago, Hebrew Torah, compiled from Sumero-Akkadian, Amoraic, and other Semitic folk tales, becomes an international bestseller. promoting the idea of one and only God, thus making believers of all other gods enemies of humanity. Between 2,000 and 3,000 years ago, iron takes over bronze. Multiple civilizations of the Bronze Age vanish much like dinosaurs in their time. Indo-Europeans from what is now Ukraine and southern Russia conquer much of Eurasia. Indo-Persians colonize India and Persia. Paleo-Balkans invade Balkan Peninsula, with Minoans there to become Hellenes and make it an ancient Greece. Latins settle in Etruscan Apennines, found Latius, and then conquer much of Europe, thus creating Roman Empire, engulfing Hellenes, engulfing their culture. Celts conquer most of Central and Western Europe, including Britain and Ireland, where they can still be found today, to later be conquered by Romans. Proto-Germans migrate from the shores of the Black Sea northward to Jutland Peninsula. Therefore, Europe becomes almost entirely Indo-European in terms of language and culture. The earliest known world map is drawn. Greeks reinvent proto-science and philosophy, borrowing great wealth of ideas from Mesopotamian law. Phoenicians invent international trade, currencies, accounting, and the most important, a consonant alphabet, which Greeks and Latins soon acquire, adding vowel letters to it. Almost simultaneously, some 2,500 years ago, Buddha and Confucius teach their schools of ethics and philosophy. As of enormous building, some 2,300 years ago, the Great Wall of China is erected. 2,000 years ago, multiple sequels to Jewish Torah become a sensation, with stories focused on the Jewish prophet with superhuman abilities, largely based on mythical founder of Rome, Romul. The first half of the millennium was about rise to maximum power and fall of Roman Empire. In the latest period of Roman world, Aurelius Augustinus Hipponensis connects newly formed Christianity with Greek philosophy, and his works become a foundation of the European philosophy. 1,548 years ago, Roman Empire comes to its end. Together with the classical antiquity, Europe enters Dark Ages for about half a millennium. Germanic tribes expel most then Latinized Celts from the most of Europe, and the youngest Indo-Europeans, Balts and Slavs, occupy Eastern Europe. Some 1,300 years ago, in the 7th century, Beda Venerabilis, an English scholar and monk, lays foundations for the European history science. On the ruins of Roman Empire in the 8th century, Carolus Magnus or Charlemagne builds Frankish Empire, based on Roman guidelines with Latin as lingua franca, but with Christianity as the state religion. Except conquering much of the Western Europe, he also brings popular education and popularizes organ, which later becomes the main instrument of the church music. Consequentially, Europe becomes a mosaic of multiple new states. Within the first millennium of Common Era, Christianity conquers Europe mostly as a Catholic Church with its center in Rome. In the 10th century, 1,000 years ago, Mayan civilization reaches its peak of prosperity, builds the incredible temple of Kukulkan in Chichen Itza, and abruptly collapses half a millennium prior to Columbus's arrival to Mayan lands, making Apocalypto one of the most historically inaccurate films of our time. Little more than 5 centuries ago, Europeans begin to discover and translate ancient texts, mostly Greek and Roman, giving way to Renaissance. Almost simultaneously, Reformation replaces religious monopoly of Rome with the pluralism provided by Catholic and a number of Protestant churches, which is followed by the Enlightenment, trade industry revolution, reinvention of democracy, understanding of liberal values. A cascade of wars started some 2.5 centuries ago with the War of Spanish Succession, continues today as wars in Ukraine and Israel, as each subsequent war paves way to the next. These wars, amongst other factors, catalyzed scientific, medical, industrial, social, and demographic revolutions, creating modern world we now live in. By this very brief and simplistic, largely Europocentric run-over of human history, I intend to remind the place of what we usually think of as history in the whole big picture.